Hi, I'm Rebecca Matthews. 3 years ago, I watched my wife get publicly humiliated and disinherited at what was supposed to be a family Thanksgiving dinner. Her own parents stripped her from their will based on lies her siblings fed them, convinced she was some kind of financial burden they needed to cut loose. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something in the background, something that would change everything. Last month, I handed those same parents an eviction notice from the house they thought they owned. Turns out, I'd been their mortgage holder for 8 months, and they'd just missed their third payment. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door, sometimes it forecloses on it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air in Columbus carried that crisp bite that makes you want to wrap your hands around something warm. I remember driving down Elm Street that Thursday afternoon, maple leaves crunching under our tires as we pulled into the circular driveway of the house where my wife Tyler had grown up. The Matthews family home sat like a monument to suburban success, all brick and bay windows, with perfectly manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than most people's car payments. I'd always felt slightly out of place here, like I was performing in a play where everyone else had memorized their lines but forgotten to give me the script. Tyler sat in the passenger seat, adjusting her sweater for the third time. She did that when she was nervous, this little ritual of smoothing invisible wrinkles that told me her mind was already racing ahead to whatever conversational landmines awaited us inside. We'd been married for 2 years, together for 5, and in all that time, I'd watched her transform from the confident woman who'd built a successful property development business into someone who second-guessed herself the moment we crossed the threshold of her childhood home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, Linda. "Dinner at 4 sharp. Don't be late like last time." There hadn't been a last time where we were actually late, but Linda Matthews had a way of rewriting history to fit whatever narrative made her feel more justified in her perpetual disappointment. Tyler showed me the message and rolled her eyes, but I caught the way her jaw tightened. Even the smallest interactions with her family carried this undercurrent of judgment, as if every word was being weighed and measured against some impossible standard. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll get through this, and then we'll go home and order Chinese food and watch terrible Netflix shows until we fall asleep on the couch." She smiled at that, the real smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners, not the polite version she reserved for family gatherings. The front door opened before we even knocked. Ashley Matthews Chen stood there in what I recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than Tyler and I spent on groceries in 3 months. Ashley had always been the golden child, the one who married well and produced grandchildren on schedule, and somehow managed to make every family gathering feel like a performance where she was the star and everyone else was just background scenery. "You're actually on time," she said, which was her version of a greeting. "Mom's been cooking since yesterday. I told her you probably wouldn't eat most of it anyway, with your dietary restrictions and all." I didn't have dietary restrictions, but Ashley had this habit of inventing problems that didn't exist, so she could position herself as the considerate one who thought of everything. The house smelled like turkey, and that particular blend of cleaning, products and floral air freshener that always reminded me of funeral homes. Linda appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that read, "World's Best Grandma," a title she wore like a badge of honor despite the fact that Ashley's kids spent more time with their nanny than with any actual grandparent. "Rebecca, honey, you look thin. Are you eating enough?" This was Linda's standard opening, a question designed to sound caring while actually highlighting whatever flaws she'd decided to focus on. I was the same weight I'd been for the past 3 years, but Linda had a gift for making you feel like you were failing at things you hadn't even known were tests. Tyler's father, Bob, emerged from his study, still wearing the reading glasses that made him look more scholarly than he actually was. Bob Matthews had built Matthews Construction from nothing, turning it into one of Columbus's more successful mid-sized firms. But somewhere along the way, he'd started believing his own press, releases about being a self-made man who understood the value of hard work. The irony was that Tyler had been working in the business since she was 16, learning every aspect from foundation pours to client relations. But somehow, her contributions always got minimized in Bob's stories about building the family legacy. Kyle was already stationed in the living room, beer in hand despite it being barely past noon. Tyler's younger brother had the kind of easy charm that made people overlook his complete inability to follow through on anything. He'd burned through 3 different careers, 2 failed restaurants, and countless family loans that somehow never got repaid. But he still managed to be everyone's favorite because he told good jokes and remembered birthdays. "There's my favorite, sister," Kyle said, which was his standard greeting despite Tyler being his only sister. He hugged her with the kind of theatrical affection that looked good from the outside, but felt hollow when you were close enough to notice how quickly he let go. The dining room table was set with Linda's good china, the kind that only came out for holidays and made everyone afraid to actually eat anything substantial, for fear of chipping a plate that cost more than most people's rent. Ashley had arranged some kind of elaborate centerpiece involving miniature pumpkins and branches that looked like it had been lifted directly from a Pinterest board about fall entertaining. Everything in the Matthews house always looked like it was staged for a magazine photo shoot, beautiful and perfect, and completely devoid of the kind of comfortable messiness that made a space feel like an actual home. We made small talk about traffic and weather and Ashley's kids' various achievements, while Linda bustled around serving dishes that she'd clearly spent days preparing. The conversation had that polished quality of people who'd learned to fill silence with pleasant noise, everyone performing their assigned roles in the family dynamic without anyone actually saying anything that mattered. Tyler tried to tell them about a new development project she was working on, a mixed-use complex that would bring affordable housing and retail space to an underserved part of the city. It was the kind of project that required real vision and financial creativity, the sort of thing that should have made her family proud. But Bob interrupted her halfway through to ask Kyle about his latest business idea, some food truck concept that would probably go the way of all his other ventures, but somehow commanded more attention than Tyler's actual success. I watched my wife's face as the conversation shifted away from her, that familiar look of resignation settling in around her eyes. She'd learned not to fight for attention in her own family, had trained herself to accept being overlooked and undervalued. It broke my heart every time, watching this brilliant, capable woman diminish herself to fit into a space that had never been big enough for her anyway. Ashley launched into a story about her son's performance in the school play, complete with details about costumes she'd sewn by hand, and how she'd had to coordinate with other parents and teachers to make everything perfect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was a nice story, the kind that showed her as a devoted mother, but there was something performative about the way she told it, like she was auditioning for the role of perfect daughter, rather than just sharing a moment from her life. Kyle countered with an anecdote about his weekend golf game, managing to work in references to the expensive country club he couldn't actually afford and the important business connections he was supposedly making. Everything in the Matthews family seemed to be about maintaining appearances, about proving worth through external validation rather than actual substance. I found myself thinking about the spreadsheet hidden in my laptop at home, the one that tracked property acquisitions, and mortgage details and financial projections that would have surprised everyone at this table. While they were all focused on looking successful, I'd been quietly becoming successful in ways they couldn't see or understand. The irony wasn't lost on me that the person they probably considered the least important at this gathering was the one who actually held the most power. Linda finally called us to the table, and we arranged ourselves in the same seats we'd occupied for every holiday meal since Tyler and I had started coming to these gatherings. Bob at the head of the table, Linda to his right, Kyle and Ashley flanking the sides, and Tyler and me relegated to the far end like we were guests rather than family. The seating arrangement told its own story about hierarchy and belonging, about who mattered and who was just tolerated. The turkey was perfectly cooked, the side dishes were Instagram-worthy, and the conversation flowed in the kind of pleasant patterns that made everything look normal from the outside. But I could feel something building beneath the surface, a tension that went beyond the usual family dynamics. Bob kept checking his phone. Linda seemed more agitated than usual, and Ashley and Kyle kept exchanging looks that suggested they were privy to information that Tyler and I weren't. It wasn't until Linda started clearing the dinner plates that Bob finally cleared his throat in that way that meant he had something important to say. The room went quiet except for the sound of Ashley stacking dishes and the distant hum of the dishwasher that Linda had already started loading with the earlier courses. "Linda and I have been doing some thinking," Bob began, his voice carrying that formal tone he used for important business conversations. "About the future, about the family, about what we want our legacy to look like." Tyler straightened in her chair, and I could feel her body tensing beside me. After years of being overlooked and undervalued, she still held on to some hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe her parents would finally acknowledge what she'd built and accomplished. "We've decided to make some changes to our estate planning," Linda continued, her voice carefully neutral. "We want to make sure our assets go to the people who will use them responsibly, who understand the value of what we've built here." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I could see Tyler trying to read between the lines, trying to understand what was being said without being said. Ashley and Kyle both looked down at their plates, suddenly very interested in the pattern on Linda's good china. "We're removing Tyler from our will," Bob said finally, the words landing like stones in still water. "Effective immediately. We've already had the papers drawn up and filed with our attorney." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt Tyler go completely still beside me, like she was holding her breath and waiting for the punchline to a joke that wasn't coming. Linda continued folding napkins with mechanical precision, as if she were discussing the weather rather than disowning her own daughter. "We know she's been struggling financially," Ashley said, her voice carrying that syrupy tone of fake concern. "Kyle told us about the loans she's been taking out, the risky investments. We just think it's better this way for everyone." I turned to look at Kyle, who was suddenly very interested in his beer bottle, peeling the label off in tiny strips like it was the most important task in the world. Tyler hadn't taken out any loans that I knew of, and her investments were actually performing quite well. But facts had never been particularly important in Matthew's family discussions. "We heard about the problems with your business," Linda added, not quite looking at Tyler. "The cash flow issues, the client complaints. We just can't risk our life's work being frittered away on bad decisions." Tyler found her voice finally, though it came out smaller than usual. "What problems? What client complaints? My business is doing fine. We just signed 3 new contracts this month." Bob waved his hand dismissively. "Kyle explained everything to us. The overextended credit lines, the projects that went over budget. We know you've been hiding the real situation from us, but we're not stupid, Tyler. We can see what's happening." I looked at Kyle again, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just family gossip or misunderstanding. This was deliberate. He'd fed them lies about Tyler's business, painted a picture of financial irresponsibility that justified what they'd already decided to do. "Kyle," Tyler said, turning to face her brother directly, "what did you tell them?" He shrugged, still not meeting her eyes. "Just the truth. About the money problems. The bad investments. I was trying to help Ty. I thought they should know what was really going on." "What money problems?" Tyler's voice was getting stronger now, anger burning through the initial shock. "I've never borrowed money from family. I've never had cash flow issues. What exactly did you tell them?" Ashley jumped in before Kyle could answer. We're just looking out for the family legacy, Tyler. You have to understand that. Mom and Dad worked their whole lives to build something, and we can't just watch it get thrown away on risky ventures and poor planning. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people tell you exactly what they think without bothering to guard their words. They'd dismissed me so completely as a factor in their family dynamics that they were having this entire conversation as if I weren't even there. Ashley was talking about protecting family assets while Kyle was inventing stories about financial problems that didn't exist, and neither of them seemed to realize they were confessing to a coordinated campaign of lies. Tyler stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. This is unbelievable. You're cutting me out of the will based on stories Kyle made up? Without even asking me for my side of things? We don't need to ask, Linda said, her voice cold. We can see the evidence for ourselves. The late payments, the maxed-out credit cards, the desperate attempts to keep your business afloat. We're not going to enable that kind of irresponsibility. What late payments? Tyler was almost shouting now, which was something I'd never heard her do in her parents' house. What maxed-out credit cards? I don't know what Kyle told you, but none of that is true. Bob stood up too, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to end discussions he didn't want to have. The decision is made, Tyler. We've talked to our attorney, we've filed the paperwork. Ashley and Kyle will inherit the house, the business, everything. You're not getting anything. Tyler looked around the table at her family, these people who were supposed to love and support her, and I could see the exact moment when something broke inside her. Not broke like shattered glass, but broke like a chain that had been holding her back. The hope that had kept her coming to these dinners, that had made her keep trying to prove herself worthy of their approval, finally snapped. Fine, she said, her voice steady now. If that's what you want, then that's what you get. But don't pretend this is about protecting anything. This is about choosing Kyle and Ashley over me, just like you always have. She walked toward the front door without looking back, and I followed her, leaving behind the sound of Linda's protest and Ashley's attempts to justify what had just happened. We drove home in complete silence, Tyler staring out the passenger window while I navigated the familiar streets of Columbus, both of us processing what had just occurred. It wasn't until we were safely inside our own apartment, with the door locked and the outside world shut out, that Tyler finally broke down. She cried like someone who'd been holding back tears for years, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from someplace deeper than just tonight's humiliation. I held her on our couch, the one we'd bought secondhand and reupholstered ourselves, in our living room that was small but actually felt like home, and let her grieve for the family she'd never really had but had never stopped hoping for. When the tears finally subsided, she looked up at me with red eyes and said, "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry you're married to someone whose own family thinks is such a failure." That's when I knew it was time to tell her about the spreadsheet. The next morning arrived gray and cold, November in Ohio, settling over Columbus like a heavy blanket. Tyler hadn't slept much. I could tell by the way she moved around our kitchen making coffee with mechanical precision, her usual morning energy replaced by something hollow and distant. She kept checking her phone, probably hoping for some message from her family that would make the previous night feel like a bad dream. But the screen stayed dark. I sat at our small dining table with my laptop open, the spreadsheet I'd mentioned, the night before glowing on the screen like a secret I'd been keeping for too long. Tyler poured herself coffee in the mug her business partner had given her last Christmas, the one that said, "Property developer by day, dream builder by night," and settled into the chair across from me. She looked exhausted, not just from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, like the emotional weight of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally had settled into her bones. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing one of my old college sweatshirts, the kind of comfort clothes you reach for when you need to feel protected from the world. "I keep thinking about what Kyle said," she murmured. staring into her coffee. About the money problems and bad investments. Where would he even get those ideas? My books are clean, my clients pay on time, my credit score is better than it's ever been. How do you just make up financial problems that don't exist? I turned my laptop screen toward her, and her eyes widened as she took in the columns of numbers, property addresses, mortgage details, and acquisition dates. The spreadsheet was color-coded and meticulously organized, tracking everything from purchase prices to current market values to rental income projections. It represented 2 years of careful planning and strategic investment, built slowly and quietly, while everyone around us was focused on other things. "Rebecca, what is this?" she asked, leaning forward to get a better look at the screen. "These are all properties in Columbus. Are these yours?" "Ours," I corrected. "Technically, they're held by an LLC I set up 18 months ago. Matthews Property Holdings." I'd chosen the name deliberately, partly as a private joke and partly because I'd always believed Tyler deserved to carry her family name with pride, even if they didn't appreciate what she brought to it. She scrolled through the entries, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement as the scope of what I'd been building became clear. 23 properties spread across Columbus and the surrounding suburbs, a mix of single-family homes, duplexes, and small apartment buildings. Most of them were rental properties generating steady monthly income, but several were fix-and-flip projects that had already turned substantial profits. "How did you afford all this?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was starting to piece together the answer. The down payments alone would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I pulled up another tab, this one showing my investment portfolio and the freelance consulting work I'd been doing for the past 3 years. While Tyler had been focused on growing her development business, I'd been quietly building my own financial empire through a combination of strategic stock investments, cryptocurrency trades that had paid off better than I'd ever expected, and consulting contracts with firms that needed someone who understood both finance and real estate. "Remember when I said I was doing some consulting work for that firm in Cleveland?" I asked. "And the investment club I joined last year? And those weekend trips to Cincinnati where I said I was visiting college friends?" Tyler nodded slowly, and I could see her connecting the dots. I was building this, learning from investors, networking with real estate professionals, finding properties that were undervalued or in emerging neighborhoods. Every spare dollar we had, every bonus from my day job, every profit from a successful flip, went right back into acquiring more properties. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the numbers with the same intensity she brought to her own business planning. Tyler had always been good with finances, better than most people gave her credit for, and I could see her mind working through the implications of what I'd shown her. "This is incredible, Becca. You've built something amazing here. But why didn't you tell me? We tell each other everything." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palms from years of construction work, the small scar on her index finger from a mishap with a utility knife when she was learning to do her own renovations. These were hands that had built things, created value, solved problems, despite what her family seemed to think about her capabilities. Because I wanted it to be a surprise. I was planning to tell you on our anniversary next month. Maybe take you on a tour of all the properties and show you what we'd accomplished together. I never imagined your family would do something like this. Tyler was still processing, scrolling through property photos and financial projections, occasionally stopping to ask questions about specific investments or market analysis. She had that focused look she got when she was working through a complex problem, the same expression I'd seen when she was reviewing blueprints or negotiating with contractors. "Wait," she said suddenly, stopping at an entry near the bottom of the spreadsheet. "This address, Elm Street, that's not far from my parents' house." I felt my heart rate pick up slightly. This was the part I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The revelation that would change everything about how we approached the situation with her family. I'd been planning to ease into this information, maybe save it for when Tyler was feeling stronger and more confident. But circumstances had forced my hand. "It's the house next door to your parents," I said carefully. "The Hendersons' old place. I bought it 6 months ago when they moved to that retirement community in Florida." Tyler stared at the entry, taking in the purchase price, the renovation costs, the current market value. The Henderson house had been on the market for months before I made an offer, priced too high initially, but eventually reduced to something reasonable when the sellers got motivated. It needed work, but it was structurally sound and in a desirable neighborhood. "You bought the house next door to my parents," she repeated, like she was testing how the word sounded. "And they don't know." "They have no idea. The LLC name doesn't obviously connect to us, and I used a property management company to handle the renovation and tenant placement. As far as your family knows, some out-of-state investor bought it and turned it into a rental." She laughed. Then, not the bitter laugh I might have expected, but something with genuine amusement in it. "My wife secretly bought the house next door to my parents, who just disinherited me for having financial problems. The irony is incredible." "That's not even the best part," I said, pulling up another section of the spreadsheet. "Look at this entry." Tyler followed my cursor to a highlighted row that showed a different type of transaction. Not a property purchase, but something else entirely. The numbers were larger, the dates more recent, and the description read simply, "Mortgage assignment, Elm Street primary residence." She read it twice before the meaning sank in. "Rebecca, tell me you didn't." 3 months ago, your parents refinanced their mortgage to pay for Kyle's restaurant equipment and Ashley's kitchen renovation. They went with a small local lender that specializes in quick approvals and flexible terms. What they didn't realize is that small lenders often sell their mortgages to investors to free up capital for new loans. Tyler was staring at me now, with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between shock and admiration, and something that might have been awe. "You bought my parents' mortgage." Technically, Matthews Property Holdings bought a portfolio of mortgages from Columbus Community Lending, and your parents' loan happened to be included in that portfolio. It was a business transaction, completely above board and legal. The silence that followed was different from the heavy quiet of the previous evening. This was the kind of silence that comes when someone is recalibrating their entire understanding of a situation, when all the pieces of a puzzle suddenly click into place to reveal a picture they never could have imagined. "How much do they owe?" Tyler asked finally. I pulled up the loan details, showing the current balance, payment history, and terms. Bob and Linda owed just over $400,000 on a house that was worth maybe $550,000 in the current market. Not an unreasonable debt-to-equity ratio under normal circumstances, but their payment history over the past 3 months told a different story. "They've been late twice and missed one payment entirely," I explained. "The missed payment was last month, right around the time Kyle's restaurant closed permanently. I'm guessing they were counting on some return on that investment that never materialized." Tyler studied the payment history, her business mind automatically calculating the implications. "If they miss 3 payments, you can start foreclosure proceedings. If they miss one more payment, I can start foreclosure proceedings," I corrected. "Ohio law allows it after 90 days of non-payment, and they're already at 60 days with the missed October payment." She leaned back in her chair, coffee forgotten, processing the full scope of what I'd revealed. Her family had spent the previous evening lecturing her about financial irresponsibility while sitting in a house they were on the verge of losing, funded by loans they'd taken out to enable Kyle's latest failed venture and Ashley's home improvements. "They have no idea," she said again, this time with something like wonder in her voice. "None. As far as they know, they're dealing with some faceless investment company that bought their mortgage from the original lender." All their communications go through a servicing company that handles the paperwork and payment processing. Tyler got up and walked to our living room window, looking out at the Columbus skyline in the distance. November light filtered through the clouds, casting everything in shades of gray that somehow felt appropriate for the complexity of our situation. When she turned back to me, her expression had changed again, the exhaustion and hurt from the night before replaced by something sharper and more determined. "What happens next?" she asked. I closed the laptop and joined her by the window, both of us looking out at the city where we'd built our life together, separate from and despite the family dynamics that had tried to define Tyler's worth. The view from our apartment wasn't spectacular, but it was ours, paid for with money we'd earned through our own work and intelligence. "That depends on what you want to happen," I said. "We could sell the mortgage back to another lender and walk away from the whole situation. We could continue as silent investors and let them figure out their financial problems on their own. Or we could let them know exactly who's been holding their debt for the past 3 months." Tyler was quiet for several minutes, and I could practically see her mind working through the options and their implications. She'd always been thoughtful about big decisions, never one to act impulsively even when she was angry or hurt. It was one of the things I'd always admired about her, this ability to step back and consider not just immediate consequences but long-term effects. "I need to see something," she said finally. "Can you show me the exact terms of their mortgage? I want to understand what we're dealing with." I reopened the laptop and pulled up the full loan documentation, everything from the original application to the current servicing agreement. Tyler read through it with the same careful attention she brought to her own business contracts, occasionally asking questions about specific clauses or terminology. "Their interest rate is higher than I expected," she noted. "And there's a balloon. Payment due in 7 years. This wasn't a great deal for them." Columbus Community Lending specializes in borrowers who can't qualify for traditional bank mortgages, I explained. "Higher risk, higher rates, more flexible approval criteria. Your parents probably couldn't get financing anywhere else after taking out multiple home equity loans." She nodded, absorbing this information. "And Kyle's restaurant? How much did they lend him?" I pulled up another file, this one containing public records and business filings I'd researched when I first discovered the mortgage situation. $80,000 secured by a second mortgage on the house. The restaurant lasted 6 months before closing permanently. No assets to recover, no insurance payout, just a total loss. Ashley's kitchen renovation? $35,000. Granite countertops, custom cabinets, high-end appliances, all cosmetic improvements that might add some value to the house but nowhere near what they cost. Tyler walked back to the table and sat down heavily, the full picture of her family's financial situation finally clear. Her parents had leveraged their home to fund their other children's expensive mistakes and lifestyle choices, then blamed her for financial problems that existed only in Kyle's imagination. They mortgaged their future to pay for Kyle's dreams and Ashley's kitchen, then cut me out of their will because they thought I was irresponsible with money. There was no bitterness in her voice now, just a kind of weary clarity. "And the whole time we've been building something real." "We've been building something substantial," I agreed. "The portfolio is worth over $2 million now, generating enough rental income to support us even if we both stopped working tomorrow. We're not rich, but we're financially secure in a way that most people our age never achieve." She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the same look she got when she was planning a complex construction project, seeing all the moving pieces and how they fit together to create something bigger than the sum of their parts. "What would happen if they knew? If they found out that you've been their mortgage holder all along?" "Legally, nothing changes. The mortgage terms are the same regardless of who holds the note. But psychologically, it might be a different story." Tyler stood up and started pacing, which was something she did when she was thinking through a problem that required both analytical and creative solutions. Our apartment was small enough that her pacing route was limited, but I could see her mind working through scenarios and possibilities. "They humiliated me in front of the person I love most," she said finally. "They made me feel like I was worthless, like everything I'd worked for meant nothing. And they did it based on lies, without even giving me a chance to defend myself." I waited, recognizing that she was processing not just the events of the previous night, but years of feeling undervalued and overlooked by the people who were supposed to support her unconditionally. But more than that, they made you sit there and watch it happen. They made you witness them treating me like I was some kind of failure and embarrassment to the family name. The anger in her voice was different now, not the hurt and confusion from the night before, but something cleaner and more focused. She wasn't angry about being cut out of the will, I realized. She was angry about the disrespect, the assumption that she and I were somehow less worthy of consideration than Kyle and Ashley. "I want them to know," she said, turning to face me directly. "I want them to understand exactly who they're dealing with, but I want to do it right. I want to do it in a way that makes the point without making us look petty or vindictive." I smiled, because this was the Tyler I'd fallen in love with, the one who could take a devastating blow and transform it into motivation for something better. "What did you have in mind?" She sat back down at the table and pulled the laptop toward her, scrolling through the mortgage details one more time. "When is their next payment due?" I checked the calendar. December 1st, 2 weeks from now. "And if they miss that payment?" "I can initiate foreclosure proceedings as early as December 15th. The process takes about 90 days in Ohio, assuming they don't cure the default." Tyler nodded slowly, her business mind calculating timelines and possibilities. "I have an idea, but it's going to require perfect timing and a little bit of theater." She outlined her plan while I listened, occasionally offering suggestions or pointing out potential complications. It was elegant in its simplicity, designed to reveal the truth about our financial situation, while giving her family exactly what they claimed to want: protection from Tyler's supposed irresponsibility. By the time we finished planning, the gray November morning had given way to a gray November afternoon, and we both felt like different people than we'd been 12 hours earlier. The hurt and confusion were still there, but they'd been joined by something more powerful: purpose. Tyler looked at me across our small table, surrounded by the evidence of what we'd built together, and smiled for the first time since we'd left her parents' house. "I love you for doing this, for seeing what I couldn't see and building something amazing while I was still trying to prove myself to people who were never going to appreciate what I had to offer." "I love you for being worth building it for," I replied. "And I can't wait to see their faces when they realize what they actually gave up." The first week of December brought an early snowfall to Columbus, the kind of wet, heavy snow that clung to everything and made the world look clean and new. I stood at the window of our apartment, watching the flakes accumulate on the fire escape outside, while Tyler sat at our kitchen table with her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to her business partner Marcus about a new project, her voice carrying that confident energy I hadn't heard since before Thanksgiving dinner. Something had shifted in Tyler over the past 2 weeks. Not immediately, not like flipping a switch, but gradually, like watching ice melt in spring. The hurt and confusion from that night at her parents' house had crystallized into something sharper and more purposeful. She'd thrown herself into work with renewed focus, closing 2 new deals and beginning preliminary planning for a mixed-use development that would be her biggest project yet. My phone buzzed with a notification from the mortgage servicing company. Bob and Linda Matthews had submitted their December payment, but it was 3 days late and $50 short. Not enough to trigger any immediate action, but a clear sign that their financial situation was becoming more precarious. I made a note in my tracking spreadsheet and closed the notification without saying anything to Tyler. She had enough on her mind without worrying about her parents' mounting money problems. After Tyler finished her call, she joined me by the window, both of us watching the snow transform Columbus into something that looked like a Christmas card. The silence between us was comfortable now, not the heavy quiet that had followed her family's betrayal, but the easy companionship of two people who understood each other completely. "Marcus wants to bid on the riverfront project," she said, leaning against the window frame. "The one the city's been talking about for 3 years. Mixed residential and commercial, sustainable design, community space. It's exactly the kind of development I've been wanting to tackle." I turned to study her profile, noting the way her eyes lit up when she talked about work that mattered to her. "That's a huge project. What kind of timeline are we looking at?" 18 months from groundbreaking to completion, assuming we get the contract. The initial investment would be substantial, but the profit potential is incredible. And more importantly, it would establish us as a major player in Columbus development. She used the word us naturally, including me in her professional future in a way that made my chest warm. Tyler had always been generous about sharing credit and success, even when she was the one doing most of the work. It was one of the many things that made her family's treatment of her so infuriating. "What do you need from me?" I asked, because I'd learned that when Tyler got excited about a project, she usually had specific ways I could help, whether it was financial analysis, research, or just serving as a sounding board for her ideas. "Actually, I was thinking about what you've built with the property portfolio, the rental income, the equity we've accumulated, the connections you've made in the investment community. What if we leveraged some of that for the riverfront project?" I felt a flutter of excitement at the possibility. Tyler's development expertise combined with my financial resources could create something significant, the kind of project that would establish us as a force in Columbus real estate for years to come. "Show me the numbers," I said, settling beside her at our small table while she pulled up the project specifications on her laptop. The riverfront development was ambitious in scope and vision. 40 units of mixed-income housing, 10,000 square feet of retail space, a community garden, and a public plaza with access to the Scioto River. The total project cost was estimated at $12 million, with the city providing land and infrastructure support in exchange for commitments to affordable housing and environmental sustainability. "The profit margin isn't huge," Tyler admitted, scrolling through the financial projections. "But the long-term value is substantial. We'd own the retail spaces outright, the residential units would appreciate significantly over time, and the community impact would be enormous." I pulled up my own spreadsheet, calculating how much equity we could access from our existing properties without overextending ourselves. The numbers were encouraging. Between rental income, property appreciation, and some strategic refinancing, we could contribute nearly $3 million to the project without compromising our current investments. "This could work," I said, feeling the familiar thrill that came with identifying a solid opportunity. "But we'd need additional partners, probably institutional investors who understand long-term value creation." Tyler nodded, already thinking ahead to the networking and relationship building that would be required. "Marcus has connections with some pension funds that invest in community development projects, and your consulting work has put you in touch with people who might be interested." We spent the next 2 hours developing a preliminary partnership structure and financing plan, both of us energized by the creative challenge of putting together a complex deal. This was what we did best together, combining Tyler's vision and project management skills with my financial acumen and strategic thinking. By the time we finished, snow was falling harder outside, and the apartment had taken on that cozy feeling that comes from working on something meaningful, while the weather does its worst. Tyler ordered Chinese food from our favorite place on High Street, and we ate lomen straight from the containers while reviewing our notes and refining our approach. "I keep thinking about what my dad said," Tyler mentioned between bites, "about protecting the family legacy and making sure assets go to people who understand value. The irony is that we're actually doing what he claimed to care about. We're building something sustainable, creating value, thinking long-term. She wasn't bitter when she said it, just observational, like she was noting an interesting phenomenon rather than expressing hurt. The distance she'd created from her family's opinions had given her perspective on their motivations and limitations. They never actually asked about your business, I pointed out. At dinner, when you tried to tell them about your projects, they changed the subject to Kyle's food truck idea. They didn't want to know what you were building because it would have contradicted the story they'd already decided to believe. Tyler set down her chopsticks and looked at me thoughtfully. You know what I realized? I spent so many years trying to prove myself to them that I never stopped to consider whether their approval was worth having. They're not good judges of character or capability. Kyle has failed at everything he's ever attempted, and Ashley's biggest accomplishment is marrying someone with money. Why was I so desperate for validation from people whose track record is questionable? It was a good question, one that spoke to the psychological complexity of family relationships and the way childhood dynamics can persist into adulthood. Tyler had been trying to earn love and respect from people who seemed constitutionally incapable of giving either freely. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the caller ID. The area code was local and the number looked vaguely familiar. Hello? I answered cautiously. Is this Rebecca Matthews? The voice was older, female, with the kind of careful diction that suggested someone choosing their words deliberately. Yes, this is Rebecca. Who's calling? This is Linda Matthews. Tyler's mother. I was hoping we could talk. Tyler looked up from her food, eyebrows raised in surprise. I put the call on speaker and set the phone on the table between us. What can I do for you, Linda? I kept my voice neutral, professional. I wanted to apologize for the other night. Things got heated, and I don't think we handled the situation as well as we could have. Bob and I have been talking, and we realize we may have been hasty. Tyler rolled her eyes and made a gesture that clearly communicated her skepticism about her mother's sudden change of heart. I nodded to show I understood her reaction while maintaining my polite tone with Linda. I appreciate you calling, I said carefully. That must have been difficult. We're hoping Tyler might be willing to come over this weekend. Maybe we could all sit down and talk through this situation like adults. I've made her favorite cookies, the ones with the chocolate chips and walnuts she used to love when she was little. The offer of cookies as a peace gesture would have been laughable if it weren't so transparently manipulative. Linda was treating a serious family conflict like a minor misunderstanding that could be resolved with baked goods and a friendly conversation. What changed your mind? Tyler asked, speaking directly to the phone. 2 weeks ago, you were convinced I was financially irresponsible and a threat to the family legacy. Did you suddenly discover that Kyle made up all those stories about my business problems? There was a pause before Linda answered, long enough to suggest she was choosing her response carefully. Kyle explained that there might have been some miscommunication about your situation. He feels terrible about the confusion. Miscommunication, Tyler repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling outright lies now? Tyler, honey, you know your brother sometimes exaggerates things. He was trying to help, to make sure we understood what we thought was happening with your finances. He didn't mean any harm. I had to give Linda credit for persistence, even as I recognized the manipulation at work. She was reframing Kyle's deliberate deception as innocent exaggeration while positioning herself as the reasonable parent trying to repair damaged relationships. What exactly does Kyle think he was helping with? Tyler asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he fed you a bunch of lies to justify cutting me out of your will. The will situation is complicated, Linda said, her voice taking on that carefully patient tone parents use when they're explaining something they think their children are too naive to understand. There are tax implications and legal considerations, that you might not be aware of. Maybe if we all sat down together, we could work something out." Tyler and I exchanged looks across the table. Linda's sudden interest in reconciliation had nothing to do with remorse or family loyalty. Something had changed in the Matthews family's financial situation, something that made Tyler's potential inheritance less of a liability and more of a necessity. "Are you having money problems, Mom?" Tyler asked directly. Another pause, longer this time. "What makes you ask that?" "The fact that you're calling to apologize after spending 2 weeks convinced that I'm a financial disaster. The fact that you're suddenly interested in working something out with the will. The fact that Dad hasn't said a word, which usually means he's too embarrassed or angry to participate in damage control." Tyler had always been perceptive about her family's dynamics, but her recent emotional distance had sharpened her ability to see through their strategies and motivations. "We're fine," Linda said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We just want our family back together. The holidays are coming, and it doesn't feel right having this conflict hanging over everything." "The holidays?" Tyler repeated. "Right. Christmas is coming and you need someone to help with expenses. Or maybe Kyle's next business venture requires startup capital. Or Ashley decided she needs a new car." "Tyler, that's not fair. We've always supported all of our children when they needed help." "You've always supported Kyle and Ashley when they needed help," Tyler corrected. "You've never offered to help me with anything, because you assumed I didn't need it or didn't deserve." I could see Tyler's anger building, not the hurt confusion from Thanksgiving night, but the cleaner fury that comes from understanding exactly how you've been manipulated. She was putting together pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for years. "What's really going on, Linda?" I asked, deciding to push the conversation toward honesty. "Because this sudden change of heart seems pretty convenient." "I don't know what you mean." "I mean that 2 weeks ago, you were so convinced Tyler was irresponsible with money that you removed her from your will without even asking for her." Side of the story. Now you're offering cookies and family reconciliation. Something significant must have changed. Tyler was watching me with interest, recognizing that I was probing for information about her parents' financial situation without revealing what we already knew about their mortgage problems. "Nothing's changed," Linda insisted. "We just realized we made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Tyler pressed. "The kind where you believed Kyle's lies about my business? The kind where you decided to protect your assets from your allegedly irresponsible daughter? Or the kind where you're now realizing you might actually need my help?" The silence that followed was telling. Linda had called expecting to manage a simple reconciliation conversation, probably hoping Tyler would be grateful enough for any gesture of acceptance that she wouldn't ask difficult questions. Instead, she was facing two people who understood exactly what was happening and weren't interested in pretending otherwise. "We love you, Tyler," Linda said finally. "We want you to be part of the family." "I've always been part of this family," Tyler replied. "The question is whether you want me to be part of it on my terms or only when it's convenient for you." "What do you mean?" Tyler looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. She'd been building toward this moment for 2 weeks, preparing herself to set boundaries with people who had never respected her autonomy or intelligence. "I mean that if you want a relationship with me, it's going to be based on mutual respect and honesty. No more lies from Kyle. No more assumptions about my capabilities or character. No more treating me like I'm some kind of problem child who needs to be managed." "Of course," Linda said quickly. "We can do that." "And no more financial manipulation. If you need help, ask directly. If you don't trust my judgment, say so. But don't cut me out of your will and then try to manipulate me back into the family when your situation changes." Another pause. "I'm not sure what you're implying." Tyler smiled grimly. "I'm not implying anything, Mom. I'm stating clearly that I know more about your financial situation than you think I do. And if you want to rebuild our relationship, It's going to start with honesty about what's really going on." The line went quiet for nearly a minute before Linda spoke again, her voice smaller and less confident than it had been at the beginning of the call. "Maybe we could all benefit from sitting down together," she said. "There are some things we should probably discuss." Tyler looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. It was time to move to the next phase of our plan. "Fine," Tyler said. "Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. But Rebecca comes with me and we're going to have a real conversation about what's been happening. No more games, no more manipulation, no more lies." "Sunday would be perfect," Linda agreed, relief evident in her voice. "I'll make sure everyone's there." After she hung up, Tyler and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened and what it meant for our strategy. "She knows," Tyler said finally. "She knows they're in financial trouble, and she knows they need me more than I need them. The question is how much she knows and how desperate they are," I replied, "because that's going to determine how this conversation goes on Sunday." Tyler reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm despite the cold weather outside. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm not doing this to get back into their good graces. I'm doing this because they need to understand exactly what they threw away." I squeezed her hand gently. "Are you ready for them to know the truth about what we've built?" She smiled, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, it was the confident, mischievous smile I'd fallen in love with. "I'm ready for them to know exactly who they're dealing with." Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp December weather that makes Columbus feel like a postcard. Tyler stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer, the same one she wore to important business meetings. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not intimidating, successful but not flashy. Everything about her appearance was designed to project competence and confidence. I watched her from the bed, where I was reviewing the folder of documents we'd prepared for today's conversation. Financial statements, property deeds, mortgage assignments, business registrations. Evidence of everything we'd built while her family was convinced she was struggling. The irony still amazed me. "How do I look?" Tyler asked, turning from the mirror. "Like someone who owns half the rental properties in Columbus," I replied, which made her laugh. "Only a quarter of them," she corrected. "Let's not exaggerate." I stood up and straightened her blazer, smoothing an invisible wrinkle near her shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Tyler considered the question seriously. "Not nervous exactly, more like excited. I've been waiting for this conversation for years without realizing it." We drove to Elm Street in comfortable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what the next few hours might bring. The Matthews family home looked the same from the outside, all brick and bay windows and perfectly maintained landscaping. But something felt different about approaching it now. We weren't coming as supplicants hoping for acceptance. We were coming as equals with information to share. The front door opened before we could knock, and Ashley appeared wearing what looked like another expensive dress. She hugged Tyler with theatrical warmth, the kind of embrace that's designed to be seen rather than felt. "I'm so glad you're here," Ashley said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom's been cooking all morning. She made that green bean casserole you used to love." Tyler accepted the hug politely but didn't return the enthusiasm. "Where is everyone?" "Living room. Dad's watching football. Kyle's helping Mom in the kitchen." We followed Ashley through the familiar hallway, past family photos that chronicled decades of Matthews' family history. I noticed that several of the pictures included Tyler, contradicting the narrative they'd tried to create about her being somehow separate from or less important than her siblings. Bob looked up from his recliner when we entered the living room, his expression carefully neutral. He muted the television and stood up, extending his hand to Tyler in a formal gesture that felt more like a business meeting than a family reunion. "Tyler, thank you for coming," Dad. He turned to me with the same formal politeness. Rebecca, good to see you again. The awkwardness was palpable. Everyone performing their roles in a family drama none of us had written, but all of us knew, by heart. Linda emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook," her smile bright but strained. "I made coffee," she announced, as if caffeine could dissolve weeks of family conflict. "And those cookies I mentioned." Kyle appeared behind her, carrying a tray of refreshments with the kind of exaggerated helpfulness that suggested he was trying to make up for something. His usual easy charm seemed forced today, his grin not quite as confident as usual. "Hey, sis," he said, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Good to see you." Tyler nodded acknowledgement, but didn't return his casual familiarity. The dynamic in the room was strange, everyone trying to act normal while dancing around the enormous elephant of their last interaction. We arranged ourselves in the same seating pattern as Thanksgiving dinner, though the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the aggressive certainty her family had displayed 2 weeks earlier, there was a nervous energy that suggested they were no longer sure of their position. Linda poured coffee into her good china cups, the ones that only appeared for special occasions, and passed around the plate of cookies she'd mentioned on the phone. The domestic ritual felt surreal given the circumstances, like we were all pretending this was a normal family gathering instead of a confrontation that had been building for years. "So," Bob said after everyone had coffee and the small talk had exhausted itself, "I think we owe you an apology." Tyler sipped her coffee and waited, not making it easy for him by offering quick forgiveness or deflecting the conversation to safer topics. "The other night, at dinner, things got out of hand," he continued. "We acted hastily, based on information that may not have been entirely accurate." "Information from Kyle," Tyler said, looking directly at her brother. "Information that was completely false." Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I was trying to help, Ty. I thought Mom and Dad should know if you were having problems." "What problems?" Tyler's voice was calm, but insistent. "Be specific. What exactly did you tell them about my business?" The question hung in the air, like smoke. Kyle glanced around the room as if looking for support, but everyone was watching him, waiting for an answer he clearly didn't want to give. "I heard things," he said finally, "about cash flow issues, problems with contractors, clients who weren't paying on time." "Where did you hear these things?" "Around. People talk." Tyler leaned forward slightly, her business persona taking over. "What people?" "Because I know everyone in my industry in Columbus, and my reputation is solid. My clients pay on time, my contractors recommend me to other developers, and my cash flow is strong. So I'm curious about these mysterious sources you're referring to." Kyle's discomfort was becoming more obvious by the minute. "Look, maybe I misunderstood some things. Maybe I heard rumors that weren't true. Maybe." Tyler's tone sharpened. "Kyle, you convinced our parents to cut me out of their will based on maybes and rumors you can't even identify?" Ashley jumped into the conversation, probably trying to rescue her brother from the hole he was digging. "We were all concerned about the family legacy. You have to understand that Dad worked his whole life to build something, and we wanted to make sure it was protected." "Protected from what exactly?" I asked, speaking for the first time since we'd arrived. "From Tyler's successful business? From her financial stability? From her good judgment?" Linda set down her coffee cup with a slight tremor in her hands. "We thought there were problems. We thought she might be in over her head." "Based on Kyle's maybes and unnamed sources," Tyler said. "You didn't ask me about my finances. You didn't look at my books. You didn't talk to my clients or my banker or my business partner. You just believed whatever Kyle told you and acted accordingly." The truth of what she was saying settled over the room like fog. Her family had made a life-altering decision about Tyler's inheritance based on gossip and speculation, without bothering to verify any of the information they'd received. Bob cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. We realize now that we may have been misinformed. That's why we wanted to talk, to clear the air and maybe reconsider some of the decisions we made. Reconsider, Tyler repeated. You mean you want to put me back in the will now that you've figured out Kyle was lying? It's not that simple, Linda said quickly. There are legal complications, tax implications. We'd need to work with our attorney to figure out the best way to handle everything. I felt Tyler tense beside me. Her family was still trying to manage and control the situation, still treating her like she was too naive to understand the complexities of estate planning. They hadn't learned anything from the past 2 weeks. What's really going on here? Tyler asked, her patience clearly wearing thin. Because this sudden interest in reconciliation feels awfully convenient. Ashley and Kyle exchanged a look that didn't go unnoticed. Linda busied herself refilling coffee cups that were still half full. Bob stared at his hands, which were folded, in his lap like he was trying to keep them from shaking. We're family, Linda said finally. Family should stick together, especially during difficult times. Difficult times, Tyler echoed. What kind of difficult times are we talking about, Mom? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truth. I could see Tyler's family struggling with how much to reveal, how much vulnerability they were willing to show to the daughter they'd recently rejected. The business has had some challenges, Bob admitted reluctantly. Construction slowed down after the pandemic, and we've had some projects that didn't go as planned. Kyle's restaurant didn't work out either, Ashley added, as if this was news to anyone in the room. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. So you're having financial problems, both the business and personally. We're managing, Bob said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Are you? I asked, deciding it was time to push the conversation toward honesty. Because from what I understand, managing might be a generous description of your current situation. Everyone turned to look at me, clearly surprised that I had specific information about their finances. Tyler reached over and squeezed my hand, giving me permission to continue. I work in finance, I reminded them. I understand cash flow, problems and debt service, and what happens when people overextend themselves trying to fund other people's dreams. Linda's face went pale. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, I opened the folder I'd brought and spread several documents across the coffee table. Property deeds, business registrations, financial statements, all organized and labeled with the kind of professional presentation that made their significance impossible to ignore. Tyler's business isn't struggling, I said calmly. In fact, it's thriving. She's got 3 major projects in development, a waiting list of clients, and a reputation in Columbus that any developer would envy. Tyler picked up one of the financial statements and handed it to her father. This is my company's performance over the past 2 years. Revenue growth, profit margins, client satisfaction ratings. Everything Kyle told you was wrong. Bob studied the document, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise, to something that might have been respect. He passed it to Linda, who read it with the same careful attention she brought to her own household budgets. This is impressive, Linda admitted quietly. I had no idea you were doing so well. You never asked, Tyler pointed out. You were so ready to believe I was failing that you didn't bother to check whether the stories were true. I pulled out another set of documents, these ones showing our property portfolio and rental income. Tyler's not the only one who's been successful. We've built something together over the past few years, something substantial. Ashley leaned forward to get a better look at the papers spread across the table. What is all this? Real estate investments, I explained. 23 properties across Columbus and the surrounding areas. Rental income, property appreciation, strategic acquisitions. We've built a portfolio worth over $2 million. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet we'd experienced earlier. This was the silence of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation, realizing that all their assumptions had been wrong. Kyle was the first to speak. $2 million? Conservative estimate, Tyler confirmed. The actual value is probably higher, depending on current market conditions. Bob looked at the documents again, then at Tyler, then at me. You've built a $2 million real estate portfolio, and we cut you out of our will because we thought you were irresponsible with money. That's exactly what happened, Tyler said. Linda was staring at the financial statements like they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. If you were doing so well, why didn't you tell us? When would I have told you? Tyler asked. At family dinners where you spent the whole time talking about Kyle's latest business idea or Ashley's home renovations? During phone conversations where you asked about my health and the weather but never about my work? When exactly was I supposed to share my success with people who'd already decided I was a failure? The question hung in the air, highlighting years of family dynamics that had made Tyler feel invisible and undervalued. Her success hadn't been a secret, but her family had been so focused on their own assumptions that they'd never bothered to look for evidence that contradicted their beliefs. Ashley was still studying the property listings, her expression growing more amazed with each address she recognized. You own the Henderson place next door? Among others, I confirmed. And the duplex on 5th Street that got completely renovated last year? Tyler nodded. That was one of our first projects. We bought it as a foreclosure, renovated it ourselves, and turned it into luxury rental units. Kyle was looking at the documents with something that might have been envy or admiration or simple disbelief. How did you afford all this? Hard. Work, smart investing, and living below our means, I replied. The same way anyone builds wealth over time. Bob was quiet for several minutes, processing everything we'd shown them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a humility I'd never heard from him before. We made a mistake, he said. A big one. We believed lies about your situation without bothering to verify them, and we punished you for problems that didn't exist. Yes, you did, Tyler agreed. The question now is what we do about it, Linda said. How we move forward from here. Tyler looked at me, and I nodded slightly. It was time for the final revelation, the one that would complete the reversal of power in this family dynamic. Actually, Tyler said, reaching for the last document in our folder, there's something else you should know about our real estate. Portfolio. She handed Bob a mortgage assignment document, the official paperwork showing the transfer of his home loan from Columbus Community Lending to Matthews Property Holdings. What is this? He asked, though his face suggested he was beginning to understand. That's the mortgage on this house, I explained. Your mortgage, which we've been holding for the past 3 months. The silence that followed was absolute. The mortgage assignment document lay on the coffee table like a revelation that had just shattered every assumption in the room. Bob stared at the official paperwork, his eyes moving across the same lines repeatedly as if the legal terminology might somehow rearrange itself into something less earth-shattering. Linda had frozen completely, her body locked in the position she'd been in when the truth hit, coffee cup suspended in midair like time itself had stopped moving. Ashley broke the silence first, her voice emerging as barely more than a whisper that seemed to echo in the sudden vacuum of sound. You actually own our house? We own your mortgage, I corrected with the precision that comes from understanding exactly how financial instruments work. There's a significant difference legally, but from a practical standpoint, the distinction matters less than you might think. Kyle had gone through what appeared to be several stages of shock, his face cycling through colors like a broken traffic light, before settling on a sickly shade of green that suggested he was either about to vomit or lose consciousness entirely. How is something like this even possible? How can you just buy someone's mortgage without them knowing? Tyler settled back into her chair with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from finally holding all the cards in a game where you've been playing from a disadvantaged position for years. The mechanics are actually quite straightforward when you understand how the mortgage industry operates. When you refinanced this house to pay for Kyle's restaurant equipment and Ashley's kitchen renovation, you went with Columbus Community Lending because traditional banks wouldn't approve the loan. Small lenders like Columbus Community Lending specialize in high-risk borrowers who can't qualify for conventional financing, I continued, pulling out my phone to show them the relevant documentation. These companies typically sell their mortgages to investors as quickly as possible to free up capital for new loans. It's a standard business practice. Columbus Community Lending sold your mortgage as part of a larger portfolio to Matthews Property Holdings, which happens to be our investment company, Tyler explained with the patience of someone teaching a basic concept to confused students. The entire transaction was completely legal, properly documented, and handled through standard industry channels. Bob finally managed to find his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain, lacking the authoritative tone he usually employed when discussing family business. You've been our mortgage holder for 3 months? You've been collecting our payments? 3 months and 2 weeks, Tyler confirmed with mathematical precision. Since mid-September, which coincidentally was right around the time you were having serious family discussions about whether to cut me out of your will for being financially irresponsible. The irony hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for months without anyone noticing. While her family had been debating Tyler's supposed financial incompetence and discussing whether she could be trusted with any portion of the Matthews family inheritance, she had literally been holding the mortgage on their house, the very foundation of everything they claimed to be protecting. Linda set down her coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly, the delicate china making a soft clinking sound against the saucer that seemed unnaturally loud in the charged atmosphere of the room. Those late payment notices we've been receiving, the official letters about potential default proceedings that have been arriving in our mailbox, those communications come from the mortgage servicing company that handles our entire property portfolio, I explained, maintaining the professional tone I used when discussing business matters with clients. They manage all the administrative aspects, payment processing, and borrower communications. We don't get involved in day-to-day operations unless there's a serious problem that requires our attention. Like consistently missed payments, Tyler added with pointed emphasis that left no doubt about the current state of her parents' payment history. Ashley was still staring at the mortgage assignment document as if she could make it disappear through sheer force of will. This can't possibly be legal. There have to be disclosure requirements, regulations about family relationships, some kind of consumer protection that prevents this type of situation. I pulled up the relevant sections of Ohio mortgage law on my phone and turned the screen toward her so she could read the actual legal language. Mortgages can be bought and sold freely in secondary markets. There's no legal requirement to disclose the identity of new mortgage holders to borrowers, and family relationships don't affect the validity of these transactions. Besides, Tyler said with the kind of calm logic that made her point even more devastating, we weren't family when the transaction took place. You had made that fact very clear during our Thanksgiving dinner conversation. Kyle was gripping the arms of his chair like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid in a world that had suddenly become unstable. What does this actually mean for us? What are you planning to do with this information? It was the question that had been hovering in the room since we'd revealed our ownership of their mortgage, the uncertainty that would determine whether this conversation ended in some form of reconciliation or the complete destruction of whatever family relationships remained. Tyler looked around the room methodically, taking in each family member's expression of shock and growing fear. These were the people who had dismissed her contributions, fabricated stories about her competence, and removed her from their inheritance based on lies they hadn't bothered to verify. Now they were sitting in a house she effectively controlled, desperately waiting for her to decide their financial future. That depends entirely on several factors, Tyler said finally, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had thought through various scenarios and their implications. What do you think would be appropriate given everything that's happened? Bob straightened in his chair, some of his usual commanding presence returning as he fell back on familiar patterns of family authority. Now listen, Tyler. I understand. You're upset about what happened at Thanksgiving. But this is still fundamentally a family matter. We can work out some kind of arrangement that's fair and reasonable for everyone involved. Tyler's laugh was sharp, but not entirely without humor. A family matter? Like the family meeting where you ambushed me with fabricated accusations and threw me out of your will? That kind of family matter? You have to try to understand our position, Linda said, desperation beginning to creep into her voice as the reality of their situation became clearer. We genuinely believed we were protecting what your father spent his entire life building. We thought we were making responsible decisions based on the information we had. Information that came exclusively from Kyle, Tyler reminded her with the persistence of someone who wasn't going to let crucial facts be glossed over. Information that was completely false and that you accepted without any attempt at verification. All attention turned to Kyle, who looked like he wanted to disappear, into the furniture or perhaps through the floor entirely. He had initiated this entire catastrophic sequence of events with his fabricated stories about Tyler's financial problems, and now he was facing the consequences of deception that had spiraled far beyond anything he could have anticipated. Screwed up badly, he admitted quietly, his usual confident charm completely absent. I thought. Honestly, I'm not even sure what I thought I was accomplishing. Maybe I was jealous of how successful you were becoming. Maybe I wanted Mom and Dad to focus their attention and resources on helping me instead of worrying about your situation. So you deliberately fabricated stories about me having serious financial problems to justify redirecting family resources toward your failing restaurant? Tyler's voice remained calm, but there was an undertone of steel that suggested she wasn't going to accept vague explanations or half-hearted apologies. Kyle nodded miserably, looking like a man who had finally realized the full scope of damage caused by his lies. I didn't think it would escalate this far. I never imagined they would actually cut you out of the will based on what I told them. But you were perfectly content to let it happen once they did, I pointed out, speaking with the clarity that comes from observing family dynamics as an outsider. You didn't speak up during the Thanksgiving dinner confrontation when they were listing all your supposed evidence. You didn't call Tyler afterward to apologize or explain what had really happened. You were happy to let her suffer the consequences of your deception. Ashley had been relatively quiet during this exchange, but now she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suggesting she had her own contributions to the family's treatment of Tyler that needed to be addressed. Kyle wasn't the only family member who had legitimate concerns about Tyler's judgment and decision-making patterns. Tyler turned to face her sister directly, giving Ashley her complete attention in a way that made it clear she expected specific, substantive answers. What concerns did you have, Ashley? I want to hear specific examples with actual evidence, not vague generalizations. You've always been somewhat reckless in your approach to things, Ashley said, though her voice lacked the conviction needed to make such a serious accusation stick. Taking unnecessary risks, making impulsive decisions without thinking through long-term consequences. We were genuinely worried you might make choices that would negatively affect the entire family's financial stability. Give me one concrete example of a reckless financial decision I've made, Tyler challenged, her business training evident in the way she demanded specific evidence rather than accepting broad characterizations. One specific instance where I did something impulsive or dangerous with money that had negative consequences. Ashley opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again without saying anything. She clearly couldn't provide the example Tyler had requested, because no such example existed. Tyler had always been methodical with financial decisions, conservative in her risk assessment, and careful in her business planning. The family narrative about her being reckless had been constructed on perception and assumption rather than documented reality. The truth that none of you want to acknowledge, Tyler continued, standing up and walking to the window that looked out on the neighborhood where she had grown up but never quite felt she belonged, is that you were also invested in maintaining your assigned roles in this family dynamic, that you couldn't see who I actually was or what I was accomplishing. She paused, looking out at the street where she had learned to ride a bicycle and played with neighborhood children, before turning back to face her family with renewed focus. Kyle needed to be the charming screw-up who could be forgiven for any mistake, because his intentions were good. Ashley needed to be the perfect daughter who made smart choices and married well, and produced grandchildren on schedule. Dad needed to be the successful patriarch whose wisdom guided family decisions. Mom needed to be the devoted wife and mother who held everything together. Tyler's voice gained strength as she continued her analysis of the family dynamics that had shaped years of interactions and misunderstandings. And I was supposed to be the problem child whose poor judgment and reckless decisions justified everyone else feeling superior and wise by comparison. The difficulty with that narrative is that it wasn't based on reality. I wasn't struggling financially or making bad decisions or threatening anyone's legacy. I was actually the most financially successful person in this room, but none of you bothered to notice because acknowledging that fact would have disrupted the story you wanted to tell about yourselves. Bob was studying the mortgage documents again, probably calculating payment schedules and default timelines in his head while trying to understand the full implications of their situation. How far behind are we on the mortgage payments? You missed October's payment entirely and were significantly late on both November and December, I answered with the precision that comes from tracking such details professionally. Under Ohio foreclosure law, we can begin legal proceedings after 90 consecutive days of non-payment, which means you could start foreclosure procedures as early as next week, Tyler added, allowing the timeline to sink in without elaboration. The mathematical reality of their situation settled over the room like heavy fog. The Matthews family was potentially 1 week away from losing their home to foreclosure, and the person with the power to prevent that outcome was the daughter they had recently disowned for being financially irresponsible. Linda was crying now, quiet tears that she attempted to hide behind her coffee cup, but the emotional strain was evident in the way her shoulders shook slightly. What do you want from us? What would it take to make this situation right? Tyler returned to her seat and looked at each family member individually, her expression serious but not hostile. I want complete honesty, not the performative version of honesty you've been offering, but real transparency about motivations and feelings and what actually happened here. Honesty about what specifically? Bob asked, though his tone suggested he suspected where this conversation was heading. About why you really removed me from the will. About what Kyle actually told you and why you found his stories so believable. About whether you genuinely care about me as a person, or if you're just looking for a solution to your current financial problems. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted our earlier revelations. This was the uncomfortable silence of people being forced to confront difficult truths about their own motivations and behaviors. Truths they had probably been avoiding even in their private thoughts. Ashley was the first to speak, her voice smaller and less confident than anyone in the room had ever heard it. I was jealous of you. Deeply, consistently jealous of how independent you were, how you didn't seem to need our approval or validation, to feel good about yourself. You built your own successful life without asking for help or permission from any of us. And I resented that because it made my own accomplishments feel less significant. Kyle nodded slowly, as if Ashley's honesty had given him permission to examine his own motivations more clearly. I was tired of being the family failure, the one whose latest business venture was always crashing and burning while everyone else seemed to have their lives figured out. Every family gathering, every phone conversation. The focus was either on my most recent screw-up or Ashley's latest achievement. You were just quietly successful without making a big production about it, and that somehow made me feel even worse about my own repeated failures. Bob was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands which were folded in his lap, as if he was trying to keep them from shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that none of his children had heard from him before. I wanted to believe Kyle's stories because they made me feel needed and important. If you were struggling with financial problems, then you might come to me for advice or assistance. If you were doing perfectly fine managing your own affairs, then what role did I have in your life? What value did my experience and guidance provide if you didn't need either one? Linda's tears were flowing more freely now, and she made no attempt to hide them or maintain her composure. I was terrified. Absolutely terrified that if you became too successful and too independent, you would stop coming to family dinners and holiday celebrations. You'd stop calling to check in or asking for opinions on important decisions. You'd build a complete life that didn't include us at all, and I would lose my daughter entirely. Tyler listened to each confession without interrupting, her expression thoughtful and analytical rather than judgmental. These were the underlying emotions and fears that had driven her family's behavior, the insecurities and anxieties that had made them receptive to Kyle's fabrications and willing to cut her out of their inheritance based on false information. The profound irony of this entire situation, Tyler said after everyone had finished speaking, is that by trying to keep me dependent on your approval and validation, you pushed me further away from the family. By choosing to believe lies about my competence and judgment, you lost the opportunity to be genuinely proud of what I had actually accomplished. By removing me from your inheritance to protect your legacy, you ended up in a position where you need my help more than I have ever needed yours. She reached across the coffee table and picked up the mortgage assignment document, holding it with the careful attention of someone who understands exactly how powerful a piece of paper can be when it represents financial control over someone else's future. This document represents everything you claim to be protecting: your home, your financial security, your family legacy, your retirement planning. And it has been in my hands for months while you were convinced I was the irresponsible one who couldn't be trusted with money. What are you going to do with that power? Bob asked again, though his voice was much quieter now, filled with the vulnerability of someone who had realized how completely the tables had turned. Tyler looked at me, and I could see the decision forming in her eyes even before she spoke. We had discussed various scenarios during our planning sessions, though neither of us had been entirely certain she would be emotionally ready to follow through when the crucial moment arrived. I'm going to sell your mortgage to another company, she announced with the calm certainty of someone who had thought through all the implications of her decision. The relief that appeared on her family's faces was immediate and obvious, but Tyler wasn't finished explaining her plans. I'm going to sell it to a company that specializes in acquiring distressed properties from borrowers who are behind on their payments. They'll probably offer you some kind of loan modification or extended payment plan, assuming you can demonstrate a realistic ability to make consistent payments going forward. The relief faded as quickly as it had appeared when the implications of her statement became clear. Companies that specialized in distressed properties were notorious throughout the industry for aggressive collection practices and loan terms that were unfavorable to borrowers who were already in financial difficulty. Tyler, please reconsider, Linda said, desperation evident in every word. We're still family, regardless of what happened at Thanksgiving. Are we really family? Tyler asked, with the kind of directness that cut through emotional manipulation and forced everyone to confront reality. Because family members don't usually fabricate elaborate lies about each other to justify major financial decisions. Family members don't typically believe the absolute worst about someone without bothering to ask for their perspective or verify the accusations. She stood up again, and I followed her lead, beginning to gather our documents back into their organized folder. We had accomplished what we came to do, revealed everything we had intended to reveal, and demonstrated the complete reversal of power that had occurred since Thanksgiving dinner. You do have several options available to you, Tyler continued. in the tone of someone providing business advice rather than family counsel. You can attempt to refinance with a different lender, though your recent payment history will make qualifying for favorable terms quite challenging. You can sell this house and purchase something smaller and more affordable that better matches your actual income. You can ask Kyle and Ashley to contribute to mortgage payments, since they were the direct beneficiaries of the loans that created this financial situation. Both Kyle and Ashley looked extremely uncomfortable at that suggestion, their expressions confirming that neither of them was in any position to provide meaningful financial assistance to their parents. Or you can figure out how to make consistent, on-time payments to whatever company purchases your mortgage from us, and hope they're willing to work with borrowers who have a history of payment problems. Bob stood up as well, his expression carrying the desperation of someone who had run out of reasonable options. There has to be some other way to handle this situation, some kind of family arrangement that we can work out that benefits everyone involved. Tyler paused in the living room doorway, looking back at the people who had raised her, but had never really understood who she was or what she was capable of achieving. The afternoon light coming through the windows highlighted the family photos. On the walls, images that documented decades of Matthew's family history, but somehow failed to capture the underlying dynamics that had led to this moment. You made very deliberate choices about what kind of family relationship we were going to have, Tyler said with the finality of someone who had reached the end of a long and difficult process. You chose to believe Kyle's fabrications over my actual track record. You chose Ashley's jealousy-driven concerns over my demonstrated competence. You chose your own fears and insecurities over maintaining a relationship with your daughter. We were completely wrong about everything, Linda said through her tears, her voice breaking with genuine remorse. We made terrible mistakes based on false information and our own emotional problems. Can't we find some way to fix this situation and move forward? Maybe eventually, Tyler said, though her tone suggested that any reconciliation would be a long and difficult process. But not today, and not by pretending that the last several years of family dynamics didn't happen exactly the way they did. If you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, it's going to have to be based on who we actually are, rather than the roles you've assigned us in your family narrative. We walked toward the front door, leaving behind the family that had never quite known how to love Tyler in a way that allowed her to flourish as the person she actually was. The December air felt clean and refreshing after the emotional intensity of the confrontation, and I took several deep breaths as we settled into our car. Tyler remained quiet during the drive home, clearly processing everything that had happened and everything that would need to happen next. The silence between us was comfortable rather than tense, the companionable quiet of two people who had been through something significant together and were now beginning to understand what it meant. "How are you feeling about all of this?" I asked as we pulled into our apartment complex parking lot. Tyler considered the question with the same thoroughness she brought to important business decisions. Sad about what we lost, but also relieved that the truth is finally out there. Powerful in a way I've never felt before, but also exhausted from years of trying to prove myself to people who were determined not to see my actual value. "Any regrets about how we handled the situation?" She shook her head definitively. They needed to understand the complete truth about my business success, about our financial portfolio, about the mortgage, about everything. They needed to realize exactly what they had thrown away and why their assumptions about me were not just wrong, but completely backwards. We climbed the stairs to our apartment, both of us ready to be in our own space surrounded by the life we had built together, rather than the dysfunction that had characterized Tyler's family relationships for so many years. "What happens next?" I asked as we settled onto our couch with takeout from the Vietnamese restaurant we had discovered near our apartment. Tyler smiled, and it was the first genuinely relaxed smile I had seen from her since this entire situation had begun weeks earlier. "Now we focus our energy on what we're building instead of what we lost. The riverfront development project, expanding our property portfolio, our life together, our future plans. We stop allowing other people's inability to recognize our worth to influence how we see ourselves or what we think we can accomplish. 2 weeks later, Tyler's phone rang while we were reviewing detailed architectural drawings for the riverfront development project that had become the centerpiece of her professional aspirations. The caller ID showed her mother's number, but when Tyler answered the call, Ashley's voice came through the speaker. "They sold the house," Ashley said without any preliminary conversation or social pleasantries. "Mom and Dad completed the sale yesterday. They're moving into a 2-bedroom condo in Grandview Heights, something they can actually afford on Dad's retirement income without needing to take out additional loans." Tyler was quiet for several moments, processing this information and its implications. "How are they handling the transition?" "Better than I expected, honestly. Scared about the change, but also relieved to be out from under debt they couldn't manage." They realized they had been living beyond their means for years, trying to maintain an image and lifestyle that wasn't financially sustainable. What's Kyle's situation? He actually got a regular job, a real job with consistent hours and steady pay, not another entrepreneurial scheme that requires family investment. He's managing a restaurant downtown, and apparently he's quite good at it when he's not trying to own the entire business himself. Tyler nodded, absorbing this update about her brother's employment situation. "And what about you, Ashley? How are you doing with everything that's happened?" Ashley's voice became smaller and more hesitant when she answered. "I wanted to call and apologize to you for everything that happened, for the jealousy I felt, for not standing up for you when I knew Kyle's stories didn't make sense, for letting family dynamics turn into a situation where we treated you so badly. You deserved much better from all of us, especially from me as your sister." "Yes, I did deserve better treatment," Tyler agreed without malice, but also without offering immediate forgiveness that hadn't been earned through changed behavior. "Is there any possibility that we could try to rebuild some kind of relationship? Not go back to the way things were before, because that obviously wasn't working for anyone, but maybe build something different and healthier going forward?" Tyler looked at me across our small dining table, surrounded by the evidence of the successful business and investment portfolio we had built together, and I shrugged slightly to indicate that the decision was entirely hers to make. Her family had shown exactly who they were when they felt threatened and insecure. Whether they were capable of being different people when they weren't desperate remained to be demonstrated through consistent actions over time. "Maybe that's possible," Tyler said finally, her voice carrying cautious openness rather than enthusiasm. "But any future relationship would have to be completely different from what we had before. No more lies, no more unfounded assumptions about my character or capabilities. No more treating me like I'm someone I'm not." "I understand completely," Ashley said, relief evident in her voice. "I'd like to try to do better, if you're willing to give me that chance." After Tyler ended the call, we sat together in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about the complexities of family relationships and the difference between loving people and accepting their limitations without enabling destructive behavior. "Are you planning to give them another opportunity?" I asked. Tyler reached across the table and took my hand, interlacing our fingers in the gesture that had become our symbol of partnership and mutual support through difficult situations. "I'm going to give them the chance to earn another opportunity through consistent actions over time. But this time, they'll have to prove they can see me for who I actually am, rather than who they need me to be to make them feel better about themselves." 6 months later, we held the groundbreaking ceremony for the riverfront development project that represented the culmination of years of planning and the beginning of Tyler's emergence as a major force in Columbus real estate development. Tyler's parents attended the ceremony, along with Ashley and Kyle, all of them dressed appropriately for a construction site and appearing genuinely proud of what Tyler had accomplished. The relationship wasn't the close family bond Tyler had once hoped for, but it was honest and respectful in a way that made it valuable despite its limitations. They were learning to see her as the competent, successful adult she had always been, rather than the problem child they had imagined her to be. As I watched Tyler direct the first excavation with the confidence and expertise that came from years of experience in construction and development, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the devastating Thanksgiving dinner where her family had rejected her based on fabricated stories, to the Sunday afternoon when we had shown them exactly who they had been dealing with all along. The mortgage situation had eventually been resolved when Tyler's parents sold their house and moved into housing they could actually afford. Kyle had found steady employment and begun making regular payments on the money he had borrowed over the years. Ashley had enrolled in real estate courses, inspired partly by seeing what Tyler and I had accomplished through strategic property investment. The family dynamics weren't perfect, and probably never would be completely healthy, but they were based on reality now in a way they had never been before. Tyler was no longer trying to prove herself worthy of love and acceptance that should have been given freely. Instead, she was building the life she wanted and allowing her family to participate on terms that worked for everyone involved. Standing there in the bright spring sunshine, watching heavy construction equipment prepare the ground for something that would benefit the entire Columbus community for decades to come, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from seeing justice, accomplished not through revenge, but through undeniable success. Tyler's family had attempted to diminish her by believing and spreading lies about her capabilities, but the truth had ultimately proven more powerful than their misconceptions, and more lasting than their attempts at manipulation. They had cut her out of their inheritance to protect their legacy, never realizing that she was already building a legacy of her own that would far exceed anything they could have left her. We had purchased their mortgage not to destroy them, but to demonstrate that their assumptions about our worth and capabilities were not just incorrect, but completely reversed from reality. They had worried about Tyler being financially irresponsible, while she was actually supporting their financial stability without their knowledge. That evening, as we celebrated the groundbreaking with our project team, investors, and city officials who had worked with us to make the development possible, Tyler pulled me aside for a private moment away from the crowd. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying genuine gratitude and deep affection, "for seeing what I was building before I could fully see it myself, for believing in what we could accomplish together when I was still trying to prove myself to people whose opinions ultimately didn't matter." I kissed her forehead, tasting the construction dust that had settled there during the day's ceremonial groundbreaking activities. "Thank you for being worth building something significant for, and for having the courage to walk away from people who couldn't appreciate what you offered." As the sun set over Columbus, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange that reflected off the Scioto River, where our development would soon provide public access and community space, we stood together looking at the foundation of something that would outlast all the family drama and financial manipulation and small-minded thinking that had tried to define Tyler's worth. We had taken their rejection and transformed it into independence and success. We had taken their lies and turned them into documented truth. We had taken their attempt to cut us out of their legacy and used it as motivation to build a legacy of our own that would benefit our community for generations. The riverfront development would provide affordable housing for families who needed it, retail space for local businesses, and public areas where people could gather and build community connections. It represented everything Tyler had always wanted to accomplish through her work, the kind of project that created lasting value rather than just generating profit. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't getting even with the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's building something so successful and meaningful that their opinion of you becomes completely irrelevant to your future happiness and success. Standing there watching the last light of day fade over the city where we had built our life together, I realized that Tyler's family had actually done us a favor by showing their true character so clearly. Their rejection had freed us from the exhausting work of trying to earn approval that was never going to be given freely, and their financial problems had provided the opportunity to demonstrate exactly who had been responsible and who had been reckless all along. We had learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting so far ahead that the people who tried to hold you back become completely irrelevant to your continued success and happiness. The mortgage situation had been resolved, the family relationships had found a sustainable equilibrium, based on mutual respect rather than manipulation, and Tyler's business had grown beyond anything she had imagined possible when she was still trying to prove herself worthy of her family's approval. But more importantly, we had built something together that was entirely our own, something that reflected our values and capabilities rather than other people's limitations and fears. The riverfront development was just the beginning of what we could accomplish when we focused our energy on creation rather than validation. As we walked back to our car through the gathering darkness, Tyler's hand warm in mine, I felt grateful for every challenge that had brought us to this moment of success and clarity. The family drama that had seemed so devastating at Thanksgiving dinner had actually been the catalyst that freed Tyler to become the person she was always meant to be. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, because it forces you to stop accepting less than you deserve and start building something worthy of who you actually are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.